Hey, welcome to the Ask a Pastor podcast. We're going to jump into some really fun, interesting questions today. If you have questions that you'd like to have answered, send them in to askapastor@orchardhillchurch.com. Mike, I ran into you in the men's room of a movie theater recently.
Yes, we did. That's right.
What did you see?
I saw the movie A Hidden Life.
Oh, I just saw you post about this.
Yes, and it was incredible. It was incredible. The Gospel Coalition had wrote about, and they'll put out like movie recommendations, and that was one of them. And reading, and I thought, oh man, I want to check that out. And so yeah, got to see that. And wait, actually, no, I'm wrong.
He goes to the movies so often.
I went twice.
There, right?
No, because we saw each other at the AMC in McCandless, right?
Yep.
Never mind. That was Star Wars.
Oh,
No.
we were in the same theater.
I was wondering. Yes.
What did you think? Have you seen this?
I have seen Star Wars.
The new one.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. If I'm honest, I mean, it's Star Wars, so I enjoy it just because it's Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I feel like they rushed through the plot. I feel like
really?
it was a sprint through the story. If I'm honest, you almost could take it and make more than one movie out of it. Maybe it just, to me, it felt a little bit. Yeah, that's what it felt like.
Interesting. The Han Solo movie that came out, like in terms of how that movie unfolded, it was like such a disappointment to me. It's like, let's spend 45 minutes running down this subplot that is actually going to turn out to be a complete waste of time.
I heard about that, actually. I heard about the Han Solo movie.
You haven't
not
seen
a
it?
whole lot. Well, no, I haven't.
Totally just ruined it.
No, I know. I hadn't seen
Spoiler alert.
it.
That's on you, though. That's been out for like a year.
Yeah, right.
What
Right.
did you
No, it
think?
is.
So I'm going to date myself a little here. So I was a kid when this stuff first started coming out, and I never saw them. And so there was all the Star Wars hoopla, and I just missed it. I was just like, whatever.
How?
I don't know. I just didn't see him. And we didn't really go to movies a ton. It wasn't that we had a ethical reason not to. Just life just didn't go to movies. Yeah. And so, so then I started watching them with my kids, and I've just never fully comprehended why people love it. To be honest, it's okay. I mean, I watched it with my kids because it was a family event.
Yeah.
But I just, to be honest, I don't get the fascination. It's
That's so funny.
I think
got this little droid thing running around and a, Chewie who can talk. It's like, I don't know.
I think that and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that like when the movies first came out in what 70s, is that?
Yeah.
That they were so groundbreaking in like the production that like people latched onto it. And then, in my family, like my parents we didn't own a lot of movies, but they owned those movies. And so
you watched them.
So when they came out, not the same ones that when the next set came out, like I went with my family to see those in theaters. Like it was a non-negotiable. This is what we do. And then, ever since then, like I've seen all of them, and I don't go to movie theaters a lot. I've seen all of them in theaters with my son. And it's almost like, when the scrolling text begins, I have this like emotional, like,
yes.
connection.
Oh, I know what you're
like,
feeling.
I have
yes.
seen
It spans
this
the generation.
Exactly.
Oh,
yeah,
totally.
Somehow. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because the people who are my age and have kids that age, you too, you grew up with a memory of the first set.
Yeah.
And then now you experience the second set with your kids. And that's the same thing. Yeah, kind of for me, except I didn't experience it the first time.
Right.
You would appreciate A Hidden Life much more than you would Star Wars.
Okay.
I've
FYI.
heard from somebody else about how great that movie was.
Oh my gosh, it's incredible.
Huh.
Yeah, it really.
Give us a spoiler alert.
Well, he dies. There's your spoiler alert.
There it is again.
But I mean, it's a true story. So you can look this guy
what's
up
it
on
about?
Wikipedia.
I'm
A guy named Franz Jaderstatter. He was a peasant farmer in Austria, and their little farming town was recruited by the Nazis, of course, eventually to fight in World War II with them. And he was like one of the only ones in his town to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. I don't believe in what Hitler's doing.
Wow.
Refused to vow his allegiance to Hitler, and then suffered mightily for it. His whole family suffered. And it was all, it's very faith-based. I mean, it came from the conviction of his faith that he that he couldn't do that, and he talks to the different priests even to get their perspective on it, and it's amazing to see how these priests were like, no, you got to do what the homeland is asking you to do, and other priests were just scared to say to do it because they didn't want to out themselves. And he got imprisoned, tortured, eventually beheaded. But it's the story of him and his.
That's a true spoiler alert.
Yeah, it was. I know. Sorry. But to see his family and the significance of his decision to do that on his family, his 3 kids, the whole thing. It's the town. It's compelling.
Wow, interesting.
Did either of you see 1917?
No.
I want to see that one. That one looks good.
That was really good.
Oh, so you saw it already?
Mm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and by the time everyone else hears this, it won't be already. But yes.
Okay.
And it was really good. It was definitely their whole thing was they made it look like it was all single camera shot.
Oh, that's amazing.
So just the sheer way it was shot was stunning. And I guess they had a lot of computer generated backgrounds and things because it was just like going through a wasteland. The story itself was good, but there were some poignant moments where the exchange of a life for another, sacrificial atonement.
Yeah.
Not in Christian terms, but in human terms.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me of how compelling that story is because you watch it and you say, that's beautiful. And at the same time, it's horrific. Yeah. And yet that's the gospel. And so it was right there in that movie for anybody who would say all stories are tied back to the great story.
That's exactly right. In fact, I just did a presentation to one of our events here on how to interpret film through the gospel lens, and every story is telling the creation, fall, redemption story, but it without the same definitions, without the same meaning, actually put into some of those words as we see them through the gospel of Christ.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
On Christmas Eve, I used the illustration from Wonder Woman. There was this moment. It was like, wow, that person so gets it. It was so cool. But anyway, we should get on to our subject at hand.
Movie reviews with Joel, Mike, and
right.
To toke or not to toke? That is the question.
That's a great question, Joel.
Or which is worse, weed or whiskey? Those were my two starting questions that I wanted to know. Okay, so this is something where my opinion has changed pretty significantly over the years, and all started with a Stuff You Should Know podcast that I listened to about a year ago. And obviously, a generation ago, our country's perspective towards weed was very different than it is today. And this is going to be something that, especially, more and more, the church is going to have to come to terms with if this becomes legalized in our state and in our country. Laying it out. First of all, it is illegal in Pennsylvania to possess weed. It's illegal both by the state and the federal government. So,
and just for those who are ignorant, you're talking about the actual rolled doobie that you would smoke.
Doobie, cheech.
Since we're not the CBD oil or the other derivatives of
CBD oils, right? I think a totally different thing. It's
now if somebody's not aware with Dobie or something, do you have some other titles?
I sure hope so.
We could talk about.
I mean,
we could talk about mowing the lawn.
That somebody would know what this is.
Reefer, maybe Mary Jane.
Yes. Yes.
I can't listen to that song the same way anymore. Like, I used to really like the song Last Dance with Mary Jane, and then Tom Petty died from a drug overdose. And so every time I hear the song, it's like he had his last dance.
That ruins it.
And it totally ruins the song. Like, and it doesn't ruin the song. The song was ruined about celebrating the drug culture, right? It just makes it very real. So,
yep.
Yeah.
In any case, we're going to set aside the fact that it is illegal to have weed. But because states are beginning to legalize it, the question at hand is it okay for a Christian to consume weed in some way, whether that's smoking it, eating it, so let's jump in. What do you think, Mike?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. You got any?
I was just going to say, bottom line, And again, I think this, when it comes to the gospel, we have to remember we are not saved by what we do and don't do. It's what God has done for us.
Yeah.
But so by saying that, I can also say, I think a Christian who's a believer, who's saved, could potentially murder somebody. Now, I know that's a different, or
it's a different podcast.
Yeah, right. It's a whole different podcast, but they could smoke cigarettes.
Yeah.
They could drink alcohol. Yeah, they could even get drunk.
So when you say it's okay, you're saying it's not going to condemn you to hell.
Correct.
Okay. So my question is, does God see that as something that is acceptable for a Christian to do?
Yeah.
Can you glorify God while you're smoking weed?
Yeah, right. And
so is that a yes, or is that a yes, that I get the question?
I get the question. Okay. Yeah, because I think, it sometimes I think we often try to draw lines and try to decide, okay, I might enjoy this, or this might be interesting to me, so am I allowed to do it? Can I draw the line here, or does the line need to be pushed back, or where's and sometimes we'll push to get kind of what we want more than submit to God's will in something. So first of all, let me just say this is more complicated a question than just a yes or no. I think there's a lot of gray here with regard to this. Gosh, I know people who have smoked marijuana in a medicinal sense, for example, and it's helped them tremendously physically from health things too. Personally, now I've never smoked marijuana, but I've smoked cigarettes before in my past. I've done different kinds of chew or tobacco products or whatever. I just don't, being health conscious, I don't want to fill my lungs with smoke of any kind.
Yeah.
Whether that's from reefer, whether that's from a cigarette, whether it's from a burning building.
Yeah.
I just don't want smoke in my lungs. That's me personally.
Yeah.
But
let's admit that smoke, that's sort of besides the point, right? Because you can buy pot brownies. I would guess that there's just as much pot in states where it's legal that is consumed, edibles than is smoked.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, okay. I was going to hold off on this, but I'll bring this out right away, just to kind of, because there's a passage of scripture that came to me as we were talking about this topic, or thinking about what we were going to talk about with this topic. And Ephesians chapter 5 came to my mind, especially verses 15 through 21. And it says this, and this is, I'll just read it. It says, pay careful attention then to and this is the HCSB version.
All right,
sorry.
Mike, you and your HC, whatever.
The Holman Christian. Pay careful attention then to how you live, not as unwise people, but as wise, making the most of the time because the days are evil. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, and I'm going to read on, but just there for that moment, the days are evil. So we have to be careful with what we're doing and what we give ourselves to, what we consume even. So don't be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is, and don't get drunk with wine, which leads to reckless living, but be filled by the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing and making music, etc., giving thanks always for everything to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and then submitting to one another in the fear of Christ. Now, this obviously is referencing wine and drinking specifically, and not to get drunk. And I think you could apply this to other things too, like potentially getting high as well. I think we need to, as Christians, I take, it says to be filled with the Spirit versus being filled with wine. And so I think there is a sense in which, what is our purpose, or what is our motive of consuming marijuana in whatever form it is? You know what I mean? And are we, in that sense, are we being careful? Are we being sensitive to the Spirit? Knowing that when it says the days are evil, I think what it's saying is, I think it's really easy to be swayed. It's really easy to be overtaken, in a sense, by our own sinful nature without even realizing it. Yeah. And so I think there's a strong word of caution here toward that I think can be applied. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think can be applied as well to to marijuana.
Tell him if he's wrong.
I want to hear your take.
I mean, my take is that it is probably not sinful. If we're okay consuming alcohol, I have a hard time seeing that as being different. And in some of the reading that I've done about this, I've actually come to feel as though alcohol is potentially way more destructive in our culture than weed is, or Mary Jane.
Yeah.
Good.
I almost said Mary Jane too, and I was saying, yeah.
I'm just not as hip as you guys.
Interesting.
Mary Jane, that's not hip.
I don't have all these synonyms down.
Was Tom Petty?
Oh, he's older than me, so Yeah.
Well, and not to, because I do want to hear Kurt. I want to hear what you have to say, but that's a good point, though. That I don't know. You've probably done more reading than me on that specific. That alcohol has caused more damage, in a sense, than marijuana. That would make sense to me, honestly. It would make sense. And maybe that's also admitting ignorance because I haven't smoking it, experienced it myself. My own bias may be that fearful of the unknown in terms of that.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So that I got to admit that and put that on the table.
And I will say that that's exactly where I was before listening to that podcast. That in my mind, and again, 20 years ago, our culture as a whole attitude towards marijuana was very different than it is today, and maybe that was my growing up in sort of a I don't want to say it wasn't legalistic, but it was a Christian culture that was higher on rules, that emphasized discipline. The Anabaptist was a tradition. So maybe that was just part of my background. And even when my wife and I started drinking for the first time, we were real strict, put a lot of parameters around ourselves. And so I mean, some of what I've come to understand about marijuana is that alcohol kills 88,000 people a year. And of that 88,000, it's something like 33 will die every year simply from drinking too much alcohol, and they die.
Wow.
Just
alcohol
immediate
poisoning.
Overdose poisoning. Yeah.
Wow.
And the rest of that number, 33 to 88, what is that? 55. Yeah. Will die from getting in a vehicle, doing something violent, or just the long-term health effects of drinking too much. And so the number, when you compare that to marijuana, is, it's unknown. It's unknown in terms of the long-term effects, because this has been illegal and it's hard to, study it long-term. But the number in terms of people getting into a car and crashing, killing somebody is pretty close to zero, as far as I understand. And it is impossible to smoke enough weed in one setting to kill yourself. So those are the ways that I've seen that compared. What do you got there?
Well, I did do a little prep on this, just for clarity's sake, I have never set sail with the 420. I've never had a blunt.
Man,
so
you just redeemed your level of coolness and hipness right in that moment.
So I'm not experienced with this personally. Biblically, I think, Mike, your point was well taken that drunkenness and being high are probably somewhat equated. Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair thing to say. If it's clear that the Bible says you shouldn't be drunk, then it's probably fine to say taking something that alters your state of decision-making function is probably not appropriate for a Christian. So I would say that is a starting point, as something to be wise about, and to say that's probably sinful. So I would say that's not okay. Yeah. Like I would say getting drunk before God is not okay. Wouldn't send you to hell.
Right.
Right. But it's not in God's best. Here's the verse that I think is probably most significant. This is 1 Corinthians 6:12. It says, I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. And the reason I say that's most influential is not because I'm saying it's beneficial or not beneficial, or I'm saying it's right or wrong, but I think sometimes we ask the wrong question, and that is this okay?
Right.
And that's not ultimately the best question. The best question is this beneficial? Will this master me? And certainly there's research and anecdotal evidence to people saying, hey, I've gone down this path and I haven't had negative impacts. And I think that's true, but you can always find anecdotes on either side.
Yep.
There is some concern about it being a gateway drug, which I think is real.
Yeah.
And having sat with people who have become addicted to drugs, visited people in drug rehab centers, known families where that's ravaged their family, I would be very cautious just quickly saying, oh yeah, it's no big deal, as I would with alcohol, because alcohol ravages lives also when left unchecked. And so I think it in a culture of saying, hey, we don't want to restrict what the Bible doesn't restrict. So in that sense, I would say I don't want to say, oh, you should never, but I also don't want to be unaware that some things have real dangers, and therefore that's an issue. Now, having said that, the slippery slope argument, you shouldn't have one drink because you might become an alcoholic, is not a good argument. Saying I might smoke that once and then it's a gateway drug, but I think there always has to be an awareness if you even start down a path of saying there are people who never intended to end in a place, who ended in a place where they were mastered by something, and it destroyed their lives. And so don't take that decision lightly or as a trifle.
Right. And that's been my experience too, by the way, just as I've dealt with people who have talked about their use of marijuana, that it seems to have an effect on them, that it does master them, and it provides this escape from reality, or a deadening of feelings maybe they don't want to feel, or something to that effect, where they're escaping, and it's caused them to become, and this is them telling me this, it has caused them to be lazy, that they've lost their purpose, they feel like they've lost direction in their lives because of that, what's the word, kind of almost causing them to be lazy or in some way. So again, that's stuff I've heard, but again, that I haven't tried it myself. So anyway, but go ahead. You're going to...
Well, I just looked for a couple articles just because I didn't know some of the things that are happening with this. This was in the USA Today, December 15th, 2019. So just the end of last year. And let me just read a part of this because, and it starts, well, let me not read this first part. It starts with an anecdote of somebody who basically started down this path, and he was a baseball player, and he was vaping THC, the ingredient in marijuana, makes people feel high and stay up all night, and he'd swing wildly. He ended up with what they called psychotic disorder unspecified, and his parents had to be called, and it's a cannabis-induced psychosis. Wow. And what this article goes on to argue is that there are a lot of medical people now in the states where it's been approved that have come out and said, we are seeing an incredible uptick in people coming into the emergency rooms with medical condition from cannabis use. Wow. That is psychosis, causing them not to function. The attorney general's come out saying that there are bigger health issues than what we have been told, and they are kind of saying, people are coming back on the other side and saying no. And so, and my point, and if you Google it, you can find this article. I thought this was pretty interesting. It's USA Today. Is marijuana linked to psychosis and schizophrenia? Wow. Is what it's called. And basically there's a growing number of medical professionals who are saying absolutely, and be careful, because this is not the inane substance that you think it is. Now, again, having said that, there's split opinion. Yeah. Without a doubt, there are people in the medical profession who will say the complete opposite. My point would simply be to say, besides the not being mastered by anything principle, there also needs to be a wise principle. We talked just a little bit about alcohol. My understanding of alcohol is that there's a tipping point on drinks and your liver. Even if you don't get drunk, even if it never leads you to get in a car and drive drunk, even if, all of these things. Red wine's a little more digestible, but that if you...
I'm glad to hear that,
If
actually.
you have... well, I mean, just from a medical professional, but if you drink hard liquor on a consistent basis, it impacts your liver, period. Yeah. And so at some point there's a wisdom piece of that. Now, having said that, you drink Diet Coke nonstop, it impacts your liver. There's a wisdom piece of that. By the way, I'm off Diet Coke. If you didn't know that, I have gotten off of it.
But you are not mastered by Diet Coke anymore.
Kick the reefer.
And to be honest, that's part of why.
Yeah,
is because I looked at it and I said, why am I letting this be an addiction for me?
Yeah.
When I know this is harming my body.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I think you have to ask that question with this as well. And so my overall answer would be to say, I think it's the wrong question to say, is it right or wrong?
Yeah.
The question is to say, if it's illegal, I'm not convinced it's permissible. I think altered state is clearly past that. But then the question is being mastered. Yeah. Is this a gateway? And then is it wise given so that we know so little about its long-term effect on people because it's been underground for so long that it hasn't been treated in the same ways.
And that's I think the challenge in all of this is that medical professionals would say that alcohol is linked to depression, right? So I think in the years ahead we're definitely going to see more and more negative health side effects from marijuana, but that's in part because nobody wanted to admit that they were smoking marijuana because it was illegal, and less people were doing it. Whereas today, a lot more people consume alcohol than marijuana.
Which brings up another. I don't want to take away where you might be taking us here, but just that brings up a question in my mind as Kurt was talking to you. That do we buy the argument that, because I've heard this argument before, making it legal across the board would be more beneficial than it being illegal? Because then people weren't forced underground. It can be more open and more known. And I'm just curious about your perspectives, because I've heard that argument that that people say, they've said that, I've heard it with other drug, even prostitution, saying make it legal. That way people won't try to hide from it. Or
I think that the only reason we're having this conversation is because it is being legalized in so many places. And so that's a good question. It's certainly for the community that consumes it illegally, would it be beneficial to them if it became legal? Maybe. But for probably the majority of people that don't consume marijuana on a regular basis, I think it would just encourage more use of it.
Yeah, so now we're into the issue of policy, public policy, which does tie to this very clearly. So the question I would ask is there a drug that should be illegal?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because I'm probably tend to lean toward fewer laws and fewer government interactions on a whole. So I'd be more libertarian in some of my own viewpoints in terms of I'm not sure that the government should tell us that everyone has to wear a seatbelt. You don't want to wear a seatbelt and you get in a crash and it costs you your life. That's your choice. I don't know that we need a law for that, as an example. But I think if you say there is some drug that is so destructive to society that we shouldn't legalize it, now you're just talking about which drugs. And even the fact that like in drinking, we have a strict drinking driving law because we've recognized there's a clear, so as a society, we've said, it's okay if you want to get drunk and stay home or have somebody else drive you, but don't get drunk and drive because it's hurting the culture and other people when you do. So the question, I think, with legalizing something like drugs is what is the long-term effect, not just the libertarian side of that, and is it wise as a culture to legalize something based on its impact Yeah. And I don't know enough about this particular drug to have an answer to that.
Yeah. I think on the mastered subject, I feel like alcohol is a mastering substance, in the same way that I feel that caffeine is a mastering substance. And I, ultimately kicked coffee because I hated that every day I woke up and I needed it. And and if I didn't have coffee, I'd have a headache and I'd be sluggish. And if I was someplace where there wasn't coffee, it was like, this whole thing's ruined.
Ruins your whole day.
Right. And I even tried to, well, anyway, so ultimately kicked caffeine that way. I feel this way about video games. Like when I hit this point in college, I got rid of all the video games that I had, and I knew that I couldn't download a single video game to my phone for, once I got a cell phone. Smartphone, I mean, just because I know how like it just pulls you in, and we recently got a Nintendo Switch, so we're playing video games again. And again, I feel that it's mastering. Like there's so much out there that like I could put so much time into this. But anyway, I just don't know. Like when let me ask you this question. Mm-hmm. We've drank alcohol together before, right?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Why do you drink alcohol?
Oh man, that's a great question. It's interesting. So in a sense, I've developed a taste for it,
mm-hmm.
and
alcohol.
For alcohol, but in the sense that like, for me, I feel like I am participating in a cultural experience, especially now with the new microbrewing kind of movement going on.
Yeah.
I think it is really fun to see how many ways and flavors and all sorts of types of different beer that can be brewed. And that in itself is becoming its own kind of culture in it. And I have found it to be fun to be in that culture, and even if it's just the little tasting glasses, just to taste the different, I may not even have a full glass, even I do, but at times, but just to me, it's more than just the feeling I get when I drink alcohol.
Yeah.
There is a loosening of inhibitions to an extent. No matter how much alcohol you drink, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
That's one of the effects that it has on you, and it makes it, in some sense, more fun to be around people, and it loosens you up in that, maybe that sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's initially what comes to my mind when you ask that question. Yeah.
I appreciate you answering that honestly, because I was in a setting a while back where somebody who doesn't drink, we were at a brewery, asked the question, why do you drink? And somebody started going off about like, I really, develop a taste for this type of beer. And then this other guy in the circle was like, it just makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And I appreciated like, if alcohol, my guess is if alcohol didn't have an effect on our bodies, an effect on the way that we feel, our inhibitions, I don't think that we drink nearly as much as we do. And I agree with you that there's a cultural experience of going to different places and experiencing something that was, brewed locally. Discovering different liquors and liqueurs and nuances. Like we're on this, dry month right now, so no alcohol. And I get to this point and we don't really keep soda or sweet beverages other than orange juice in our house. And I get to this point in the evening where it's like, I want to mix something up, man. Like I want to, like literally, I just enjoy like the creative cooking process. I want to throw some stuff together and make a unique flavor. But I just got to admit, if it didn't affect the way I feel, I don't think we would drink.
Totally. There are times where if it's been a long week, a long day, that I might look forward to having a beer that night and whether it be watching TV or maybe having a beer at dinner or something.
Yeah.
That there is an effect that it has where it's like, kind of okay, I feel like I've in a sense loosened up and makes me more open in a sense, relatably to other people in certain ways too.
Yeah.
Makes you forget in some sense too some of your troubles, I guess, which that's Scripture talks about how it does that, but you can take that to an extreme too.
Yeah. And there are certainly, I'd say, unhealthy ways of drinking. And what I found over the past couple years, especially, I've learned a couple things about alcohol. One is that in me, it actually causes anxiety. Like I can, like 4 to 5 hours after I drink, I feel this sense of anxiety. Not every time, but if it's an anxious point in my life, that it really brings that out. Another thing that I noticed is, you both know that we started a brewery 6 months ago or so. It opened, and we went through a very long process of preparing for that, opening it up. And part of what we were doing was we went around to every single brewery in the Pittsburgh area with our kids most of the time, buying food, trying their drinks. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that when you get a drink at a brewery, you're not getting a 12-ounce 4.5% beer. You're getting 16 ounces. So, and 4.5 is kind of like the standard Bud Light ABV. But the beer that you're getting at a brewery is usually at least generally 5.5. Some of those IPAs are real high, and you're getting 16 ounces, not of IPAs, but of other beers, you're getting 16 ounces, which is 33% more. So in that one beer, even in the flight that you're talking about, if you're getting 4 or 5 ounce pours, that's 20 ounces of beer. Yeah. So it ends up being a lot more alcohol that you're consuming than you even realize. And so we have this, chart on our fridge where I actually write down how many drinks that I have. And I try to be honest with myself and say, if this is a 16 ounce, 5.5% beer, this is not one beer. This is much more than that. And so I just think that we've, as a society, we are medicating ourselves with alcohol. And I don't see that as a positive thing. We're drinking more than we should be. I forget whatever document the government puts out about health. For the longest time, it said men should not have more than 14 drinks a week.
14.
That's high.
But then it is high. But then there was some recent studies that have come out that said if you're having more than 10 a week, you're shortening your lifespan by like a year and a half or something like that.
Right. So. Which, and that goes back to what we said earlier about, is it wise just because it may be permissible? Yeah. So a question, Joel, for you around this. So as somebody who started a brewery and sees the potential negative effects of alcohol, how do you reconcile being a provider of that service with people who then may drink to excess in unhealthy places?
I'd say in our neighborhood, something like that was desperately needed. Something that was a gathering place, a community space for our neighborhood. I think that the creativity that's involved in crafting something can be part of our God-given joys in life. So I see that as a form of art and pleasure. Alcohol in itself, is not condemned. It's Psalms say wine gladdens the heart, which assumes that there's a winemaker someplace. So I don't really have a problem with that. Knowing that people are going to drink to excess, that there's going to be addicts there. I don't want that. But at the same time, I know that we're providing something that is good and in some ways beneficial to society. And we talked about numbers of people that die. The number on people that die in car accidents is significantly. I think it was it was in the 400s a year. Now vehicles, do we need them? We did okay without them at one point. So they provide something that's good for us, despite the fact that there's some drawback. I don't think that's evidence to get rid of it altogether.
You just hit on something that I just want to admit I think was interesting. You just brought up pleasure.
Yeah.
It's funny because how many when you ask why you drink alcohol, I even felt myself when you asked that question, because I went down the road of the crafting and it's fun to do it, and then I came to also I do like it and I enjoy the effects it has on me, but the pleasure, to enjoy something, for it to be pleasurable to us. I don't know, is there something in here with that we might be struggling with in terms of asceticism? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Do we feel, because I know that as a Christian, growing up, especially young in a I felt like a little bit more dogmatic perspective. I defined my faith by what I didn't do or what I was prohibited from.
Sure.
You know, especially like in high school and middle school and these places where it felt like everybody's partying, everybody's drinking, everybody's doing drugs or all this other stuff. And so I set myself apart by, I don't do these things.
Yeah.
These are the things I don't do. Well, what's the other side of the coin? You know what I mean? What's the side that, because I feel like as I look back, man, I wasn't a very good witness about the positive side of what it was like to be in a relationship with Christ. And I think part of that is maturity and just growing up in your faith. But I'm just curious, as you say that, like, I wonder how many of us kind of spurn pleasure in a sense.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I would have said if that question had come all the way back here is, and it's a bit of a cheesy answer, but why do you drink? To the glory of God. And what I mean by that is if God created something and it is not forbidden, it is good and to be enjoyed in its proper context. And so, and just like a good meal, you know, you go out and you eat a good meal or you prepare a good meal, that is done to the glory of God. And so I think alcohol can be something that you say, I enjoy this because it's part of the created order and the creative process. Knowing that I think, again, food can be taken to an extreme, alcohol can be taken to an extreme. But so there's more danger with it, but that shouldn't take you from the place of being able to say, if I can't do it to the glory of God, then I shouldn't do it. Yeah. And that, and so, yeah, there's other factors with that, but things are given to us to enjoy.
I love that because there's a freedom too in that, in a sense. But again, it's this. It is interesting because you don't want to be mastered by anything.
Yeah, don't let your freedom
right.
cause you to become a slave.
Yes, and don't let your freedom. I think I forget where now. You guys will know the reference, but Paul says, "Don't let your freedom be the stumbling block for someone else."
Yeah.
So.
Well, and the issue again, just if you're really going to try to be faithful to the text with alcohol, and I think again this is the same thing with a doobie.
Yeah.
And see how many more words we can drop.
Yeah,
yet.
I know, right?
You already used that one, but is the issue of, so when am I drunk?
Yes.
And I think the answer there isn't where am I, how many drinks, this or that, because then what I'm doing is I'm saying there's a line, how close can I get to it without actually breaking it? Yeah. And I think that's the wrong approach. Right. The right approach is to say, I want to stay far enough away from the line that it's never in question.
Right.
And I think that's in terms of a relationship with alcohol or a relationship with, if you're talking to kids who haven't been married and they say, well, where's the line? Well, the issue isn't let's define the line and dance on the edge and dangle over. It's stay a bit back so that you have something left. And so you've honored something bigger. And I think with alcohol, I would say that's probably, again, a biblical way of thinking about that, is to say the issue isn't how finely can I define being drunk so that I can say I didn't do it. It's to say that's there for my own protection, my own God saying, I gave you something to enjoy, but I want you to have some healthy boundaries around it.
Yeah, and I think going back to the question about hash is that
oh man, you dropped it again.
Is that I think you're right on that. What is there an amount of marijuana that you can smoke or consume, I should say, that is not equivalent to being drunk? And I think that's a big question, because drunkenness is a sin. Is there, and I had this discussion with my life group the other night, and there were guys in the room that were much more experienced with this than me. And some of them, their answer was, no, like when you have pot, you get high, and there is no a little bit high, there's just high. So maybe the three of us aren't maybe we need to do some personal research before we can answer that. That was a joke. Just joking. But really, I think that's what this comes down to, is if we're saying that alcohol is okay, but drunkenness is not, is there an amount of weed that you can have that's okay? And then is there a line that you cross that's not okay? Is that?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think if there's someone with more experience that we can draw from their experience a little bit to find out more about that, I think that'd be beneficial.
By the way, that was a low-key plug for Life Group.
Yes.
Life groups at Orchard Hill, we're hitting all the subjects.
Yeah. Right. And there's a guy in that group that said, because he said, I don't want to have anything that's going to stop me from running the race to pursue Christ. Mm-hmm. And he said, I don't mind if other people drink or have a beer around me. But he doesn't want to. Let me throw out this question. How do I support a relative who has a current or a past addiction? There's an alcohol or a drug. Either they're in recovery or they currently struggle with it.
That's a great question. The first thing that comes to my mind is, do they want supported? That's probably one of the hardest things, because sometimes to support somebody who's in an addiction caught up in an addiction of some sort, sometimes, like I've been around parents who've had to kick their kids out of the house, and that was how they supported them, and it put that person in a place where they experienced the consequences, and the pain became greater than the pain involved in changing. Yeah, I think is how they often say it in recovery programs. And so I think, do they want supported? In what way do they want supported? And so it gets a little bit more nuanced. So why are you smiling?
I'm sorry. For those of you not from Western Pennsylvania, to be supported, we would use a verb. Do they want supported? I'm sorry. Just it means Pittsburgh. Do they want to be supported? If you're not from Pittsburgh.
Wait, was I just guilty of Pittsburghese?
A little bit.
Oh my gosh!
But, I didn't even. Okay, no, it's all good, man. It just made me laugh. So, yes,
thank you. Well, good to be corrected by the cheesehead.
It's a great question to say. Do they want to be supported? Yes. Because if they don't, then there isn't. But a lot of times there's so much shame when somebody gets to that point that loving somebody, regardless of whether they stumble or not having conditions. I mean, what you're doing is you're embodying and trying to live the gospel, saying, okay, you're being beat by something. Mm-hmm. It doesn't define you. I love you regardless of whether you're beat by this or not. I'll help you if I can, walk away from it. But I'll love you either way. And to your point, Mike, sometimes the way that you help somebody is to not throw a mattress in the pit for them.
That's right.
And that might mean making them face the consequences of their own choices at times. And that's a hard thing to do, but that I would say, as a parent or a spouse of somebody who's dealing with an addiction, sometimes it's be there, but I'd be very leery of softening the negative consequences, because negative consequences are what teach us the lessons we need to learn. And especially if you're a parent dealing with kids. I've seen a lot of parents, and their kid will make a mistake, and the first thing they'll do is try to soften the blow. And not just in this arena, in any arena. And the wisest thing a parent can do is actually not soften the blow of life, because life teaches you hard lessons. And if you don't learn it there, then when the stakes are much higher, you'll repeat the mistake a lot of times.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to say here that, if you're someone that's listening, that just pay attention to, if you smoke pot or consume alcohol, pay attention to it, that being mastered by anything is no fun. And I think what a gift it was for me to be in a life group and sit with a group of men. And our task was to write down what is something that could shipwreck your faith and your family and your life when you look down the road 10 years. And to be able to say to those guys, alcohol is something that I need to pay attention to, and I want your support in, was such a gift. And I think just to be in a group that can support that and help keep healthy boundaries. Yep. Anything else that you add to that sort of
that's
warning?
Amazing. The supportive community, being able to be in the light, to bring stuff out into the light, and huge. Yeah. It's really good.
Well, that's all we got, I guess. If you're torching one up, blazing. You shouldn't do that because it's illegal in Pennsylvania. But this is a good conversation to have. And just, for absolute clarity, none of us here are saying, go out and smoke pot. Just trying to get to the bottom of what is a complicated issue and is going to be more real especially in the years ahead. So thanks for listening to Ask a Pastor. Send any questions to askapastor@orchardhillchurch.com.